There's no doubt that now, especially with Modern Warfare 2 so far, that we're seeing these content drops, then a few weeks of silence and then a seasonal update or something like that, and not a whole ton in regards to content-worthy discussions in between those peak points of seasonal launch, seasonal refresh, seasonal launch, seasonal refresh. So on a personal end, I've been trying to take that, use it, and have less time on socials like Twitter and such, and just kind of live outside my office a bit more recently. But when I come back a few minutes a day or something to see the discussions surrounding this, Warzone lately has dominated my feed and the sentiment regarding the state that it's in. I'm sure that you've seen plenty of that discourse, but today I want to chime in a bit, give my 2 cents, because I think there's valid concerns, valid criticisms, and honestly, I just want to be entirely transparent with you where I'm at in regards to content right now. I've been taking more days off, I've been easing off the pedal a bit, which in the grand scheme of like the social media game is not really what you want to do, making yourself less known perhaps. That's an entirely different story for a different day, but I just don't have that excitement to jump on as of late. And let me preface this by saying that I'm in my own little bubble, fully recognize that, entirely understand that. My game experience is vastly different than a casual's. I fully recognize that fortune and frankly absurd luck that this is able to be my job, affording me more time to play and thus having much faster burn rate through content perhaps, and things like new additions by comparison to the casual player. I also want to preface this by saying that I apologize for any influx and maybe negative sentiment where I might just have like a slightly more bitter undertone to stuff. I've always been that glass half full guy and like to think that I am for most things in life, but when it comes to this game and the content right now, I just feel kind of jaded by this year. I'm actively considering testing out new content and new games here on the channel. The finals is coming to a playable build, which seems really cool. Dead Drop has me interested in some elements that I'd like to explore. Honestly, please do tell me if you'd be interested in that. I don't expect interest from everybody in terms of that kind of content changing up so drastically, especially with an audience built around COD for the last decade, but it's just one of those things of like, how do I make it to another game launch later this fall without losing my sanity in the meantime? So right now we press on, but today I want to explain where my mental is with all of that. So feel free to agree, disagree in the comments, but let's get into it. One of the first things here in terms of like gameplay, some of these topics of discussion might be a bit out of order, just kind of rolling off the top of my head here. One of the big ones is weapon metas. To me, it's just boring right now, man. I mean, the RPK and the Fennec may not necessarily be the main meta as of right now, but when you consider that those were not adjusted for over 100 days after the launch of the game, it's not a great start to how you look at the meta and how things will unfold for the year coming. Now, with the KV broadside being a major annoyance and problem, I'd like to say that that's fixed out soon, but I also certainly think that there's the possibility that this could be the most annoying and problematic weapon in the game for at least until Season 3, maybe beyond, with how they handle the Fennec and RPK. I guess mid-season's kind of going to be that telling point on if we do see it adjusted and nerfed, but I feel like we've had these sort of standout weapons more so than other times in recent years with Warzone 1. Yes, there is always a dominant meta. Absolutely understand that, fully recognize that, and honestly, I'm probably not one to really help because we make loadout videos here on the channel, but when I look at like the overall air quote meta as a whole, I feel like this is just too hyper-focused and as a result, more boring than what we saw in the last 3 years of Warzone 1. Like Vanguard, we of course had incredibly dominant weapons, the Bren, STG, BAR, NZ41, and other things like that, but we had a lot of crossover where at a certain time, there were dominant weapons, yes, but you could easily use other weapons and still have an incredibly good time with that. Like, I feel like when we talked about our top 10 meta weapons as of the last 3 years or so, those would be something that those top 10 were more so in line with the top 10. Whereas the top 10 weapons this year, where we talked about previously, like the RPK and the Fennec were number 1 and number 2, those were by far number 1 and number 2. So like you had at least a handful of other weapons you could use and do incredibly well with of a sort of top 10. But I mean, even going back to like Cold War, depends on when you're looking at it. Earlier in that integration, the AUG and DMR and M16, FFAR, all of course were absurdly dominant, but again, still some crossover. Modern Warfare, you had a handful of weapons, the Grau, Kilo, Bruin, and so on, that maybe it's just incorrect memory, but I do feel like right now it's way more hyper-focused on those 1 to 2 weapons that you'll see at a single time absolutely dominating. To me, that's just kind of bred a boring gameplay experience, especially after having done that the last 3 years in all my lobbies. So it's like one of those things that my burn rate, again, is just way quicker than other stuff. Another thing that has really bothered me as of lately, and honestly since the beta, since COD Next, when we were promised a lot more of it, is a lack of communication. We're unfortunately back already again to minimal, vague communication with the community. If you look at the Twitter feeds, you look at the Trello boards, a lot of this stuff isn't getting updated. A lot of this stuff is not seeing any sort of discussion or communication for days at a time. And then when we finally do have stuff, it's either a playlist update or something that is a very vague announcement of a tuning or a fix or something like that. And this is one that I get you can't really tell everything that's going on. I know there is a lot of legal red tape that comms has to go through before putting stuff out that the public does not see, but like, when you can talk about stuff, why be vague on it? Why not be transparent? One of the things that as of recently was kind of another starting point here for this frustration was that last week, Infinity Ward tweeted about reducing the lethality of AI across DMZ, but also they listed it as a moderate change to AI. So, okay, what in the world does moderate actually equal? Because to me, that kind of seems like a way to bypass any further criticism that could be a result post-adjustment, kind of like skipping accountability and deflecting before the fact even happens. Like, if moderate is a 1% change, obviously that's not nearly as much. People are going to get annoyed by that, and that change would all but be for show at that point, but they also could be like, oh, well, we can tune it again. We ran into some issues with the application of it or whatever. But if we knew that it was 1%, if they said, hey, we decreased lethality by 1%, people would immediately be like, dude, what? That's not what needs to happen. So in that sense, like, why do we have that? And then like, even just on a more fundamental level, we don't have specific game stats in game, whereas Vanguard and Cold War gave us detailed stats for all our weapon attachments, all our weapons and things like that. So I don't get why we have, from a fundamental level onward, this just lack of communication and vague nature. But even more recently was the confirmation that squad sizes are coming at mid-season for Resurgence, as if they shouldn't have been there already. I mean, I think the tweet's been deleted, but I've seen screenshots of it plenty of times where solos, duos, trios, and quads were all stated to be there at launch of Season 2, but clearly they weren't. And we had solos for what, like 3 days or something, which is something that players absolutely wanted to see as a staple mode here for that. So we now have a playlist update being marketed as something for a mid-season update coming in like 2 weeks or so. So like, why? I don't quite understand that, and that kind of plays into the next point here, where if you're using a playlist update to end up hyping up a new seasonal update, we're really running low on content, right? Like, that's a lack of updates thing, because if that's one of the things that you're trying to hit home is introducing the 3 remaining game modes as stable game modes, that's a playlist update that could happen at quite literally any point. I don't think you guys realize that we have playlist updates every single day, and stuff that either requires you to start up your game again and restart application or not. That stuff happens every day. So why can't we see that happen now and being held off? I don't understand that artificial holding out of things that should be base staple things for the game. To me, when I think about it, like this game in particular, COD 2.0 as it's being dubbed, it wants to be a live service game, but with no actual live service. I mean, again, coming back to even what we mentioned in the intro, that was something that we have these large dumps at the beginning of the seasons and at the mid-season point right now, but it just seems like they're kind of sabotaging everything in between. We, as of Season 2, yes, had updates to the Path of the Ronin event, which is interesting. I get, again, kind of elongating that, but it kind of defeated its own purpose whenever you ended up having the crossbow as a seasonal launch weapon, but we couldn't get it actually at the seasonal launch without doing some bypassing and bugged, not necessarily exploits, but like workarounds. I just feel like right now they're kind of adhering to that old kind of ship and drop and then work on everything else, and then ship and drop and work on other stuff coming up, which fundamentally is not necessarily a problem, but it's one of those things that you market the game as a live service game. So which is it? Is it something that is just a drop and ship and move on, or is it something we should be expecting updates every single week, every other week? It just seems like Call of Duty has a conflict right now with its own identity on where it wants to be in the whole gaming landscape. And kind of playing into that with a lack of updates is it feels like right now, one of the things that I'm not really excited to jump in or like jumping out of my bed to come play Call of Duty every day is that it just feels like we've done everything that we can at this point. Like, I understand we have Ashika Island. Yes, awesome. I love Resurgence. It's a lot of fun. But even with that, like, I feel like I've kind of burned through everything there is on offer with that at the moment. Regular Battle Royale, I've gotten my wins. I've gotten my high kill games. Only thing I haven't done is the nuke contract, just because, like, that's just something that me and my squad haven't actually wanted to go for too much just yet. I'd be for it, but the other guys don't really care too much. And then multiplayer, ranked up all my weapons, got my camos, stuff like that. I feel like there could be a little bit more as time progresses. Again, going into those live service sort of discussions. But I mean, that's just me. Other things, there's definitely some things that have deterred me a little bit. Cheating, I'm seeing a rise of this just a lot as of lately, whether it be wallers, aimbotters, all of that, rage hackers. I just really haven't wanted to get on because I don't want to have to deal with that. I don't want to end up jumping in, getting a nice gameplay going, and then just having somebody that's pre-aiming and sitting in a corner for the moment that I walk around. So like, I've seen the clips here of it. I've been fortunate enough that I feel like as of Ashika Island's launch and when I started to play at the beginning of season 2, and in those games, I didn't really encounter anything too sus, but I feel like at the sort of tail end of when I was playing, that's when we started to see this extra rise once again. So in that regard, I don't really want to risk it. I don't want to waste my time by going in and playing and then just being killed by a cheater. Maybe that's a weird way to look at it, but that's kind of how I'm feeling with it. And then audio is another big thing that I've seen a lot of people talk about, because it's just one of those things that we don't have working audio. We do, but it's incredibly inconsistent. I've seen clips where there's quite literally a team rolling up on somebody and they don't hear a single footstep, but other times there's people sitting in a corner that hears it perfectly. So what's the problem that we can't get that fixed out? Because interestingly, we had audio that worked in the beta. We had audio that started to work at the end of Warzone 1, but right now it seems like we've kind of lost all of that 3D and spatial audio that we had working for us by launching Warzone, because this has been a problem that has been there since Warzone began in November. So, I mean, I feel like with every sort of update, it's just not quite where it should be. I mean, you have people resorting to Windows audio boosting mechanisms to increase audio for what should be in-game. So I guess outside of just a mini rant and explaining some frustrations I have with the game, how do we fix this, if at all? Because, I mean, from all things that I see, it's fundamentals that are flawed from discussions out there and what may come up. And I'm not even talking about things like movement and stuff, though I will absolutely chime in that even in the Modern Warfare 2 beta, that movement was way more fluid than what we have now, which, kind of stepping away and sidebarring, is that I swear whenever the game launched Modern Warfare 2, I felt like I was crazy because something felt different. But then I looked at recent clips that I had from the beta. I saw people posting other clips from the beta, and there genuinely was a movement nerf from the beta to the launch that makes you feel like a stick in the mud, essentially. So that's something that if you guys have noticed that as well, you're not crazy. I thought that I was, but turns out I wasn't. But like, even independent of that, we're not even talking movement, slide canceling, stuff like that. But just in general, the focus, I think, is too hyper-focused on a vision that Infinity Ward had and how they want players to play the game, but in doing so, removing a ton of things that turned out good for the gameplay ecosystem by the end of Warzone 1 and that Vanguard Chapter 3 era. Fundamentals that we saw welcoming more play while not sacrificing any playstyle in particular from someone else's gameplay experience were all but gutted for some reason. Like, I don't understand why. I get maybe there might have been some developmental crossover, maybe Raven introduced some things like those redeploy balloons, those redeploy tokens, lootable perks and things like that, while Warzone 2.0 was in development, and maybe it was too far along that they couldn't like actually add that in fundamentally. But honestly, I'd contest that by saying that we knew of Warzone 2 for so long, and we knew of these things coming to Warzone, and some of them even being in the Warzone 1 experience as the time of that update. So like, why did we gut so many good things that did not punish one style, but instead expanded the ways of play that you could play in Warzone? Personally, I don't get it. My friend Prestigious Key put it very well in a recent video where, while he discussed Modern Warfare 2 more so, I'd say it applies to both Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2, but it's the first time that in my recollection, I feel like the game feels like it's actively pushing back on how you may want to play the game, and instead, it's a game made for the way that Infinity Ward wants to play. And that's the part that's kind of frustrating. I get you have a vision, I get you want a product, and you want to build it how you want, but hyper-focusing on one singular gameplay route does not do good for anyone. If anything, it's more damning to the gameplay experience and alienates more players than you invite. So that's kind of like where I'm at with it, man. I mean, perhaps I'm just losing my interest in BRs. I mean, it's certainly possible. I've been playing BRs regularly since like the Arma mod days. Hell, even like Minecraft Hunger Games, which if you guys remember that, OG status in my opinion for those two. But I mean, it certainly could just be a collective burnout thing here at this. But when I look at just what we have right now, it seems like the game's almost like self-sabotaging, if that makes sense, where we have all these answers and this feedback, but none of it is being taken into consideration. And sure, yes, you can argue that, okay, the casual player doesn't care about what we just discussed here in this video, but I mean, for your simple gameplay sake, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to remove cheating? Why wouldn't you want updates? Why wouldn't you want communication? Why wouldn't you want multiple weapon metas that don't simply funnel you to 1 to 2 weapons and quite literally nothing else? And yes, again, metas do exist all the time, but with at least other games that we saw with the integrations for Warzone 1, it was at least a little bit more level. That bell curve wasn't so steep at the middle as to where we are now. If that's even a good comparison, I don't know. Again, maybe getting ahead of myself, but that's where I'm at here at this. Right now, unfortunately, like I hate to say this, but I just really don't care about Warzone right now. I don't care about jumping on and playing. There's a lot of issues that I think need to be ironed out, and I think just an identity thing with Call of Duty that needs to be fixed out. I think that we're just in a frustrating place as a community, but again, maybe that's entirely me. I said at the very beginning, I fully recognize I'm in my own little bubble as a content creator. Very well could just be that. Maybe I need a dose of reality. Feel free to let me know in the comments, but that's what we're gonna call it. I'd love to get your thoughts and feedback down below. But if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, you'd like to stay up to date with all things like this, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you in the community. But for now, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.